Welcome back, everybody. In this section of Core AWS Identity and Access Management, we're going to show you how to use the JavaScript SDK in Node.js to create users. Let's get started. In our last session, we created two users using the Amazon Web Services console. See our user John Ruffin here and our user Sally Smith here. But who wants to create users by hand using the console? If you think of a typical use case for identity and access management, you would typically have what's called an authoritative source. An authoritative source. So some authoritative source is going to give you information about new users, changed users. Right? Basically, those are the two scenarios. A new user is going to be created, or you're going to do something that needs to change the status of an existing identity. And that authoritative source is typically human resources. So you would get an HR file with users and whatever it is that needs to be changed about said user. So let's mimic that scenario in our development environment. But first, before we get started with development, you're going to need to do a few things. You're going to need to install, I hope you have Node.js installed and npm. And then you're going to need to install the AWS SDK. So from your command line, you would run npm install AWS-SDK, and then you would get the SDK so you could make some calls. And then the second thing you're going to need a way to pass the AWS SDK some credentials. These credentials will tell the SDK which account to send the request to. It's going to tell the SDK which account to send the request to. And if that account actually has authority or authorization to send and receive those kind of request responses. So how do we do that? How do we set that up? On this page, it tells you a couple of different ways. In my scenario, I have set up a credentials file. I'm showing you here what's inside of this home/.aws folder. I have a bad credentials file, the one I'm going to show you, and then my credentials file with the actual username and secret token assigned here. So let's take a look at bad credentials to see the format. Here you have default. Now here you have a profile. So this means that you can somewhat switch between users if you like. So whichever user has this access key and this secret access key, you can use this default and send requests as you were this individual user. Or down here, this would be a different user with a different access key and secret access key. Then you can use this profile to say, oh, I want to now test the API and my code as this user right here. So if you look over here in the code, I'm going to expand this so you can see it. Line number 5 is actually where you tell AWS which one of those profiles, which one of those secret keys and access keys you want to use. So right now, we're using this one, because this is set up with my access key and secret key, the one that we downloaded earlier in video number 2. So what else is important here in the code? In the code, what are we doing? On line number 10, we're looking to see, hey, can we use a promise, right? We're looking to see if the SDK has this global promise variable declared. If it is not declared, then we're going to go ahead and require in Bluebird, which is another promise JavaScript library. So if it is found, then we're good, right? We're using the new SDK 2 from Amazon Web Services. So that's just simple. That's just JavaScript. Down here, we are creating a couple variables and assigning a couple of functions to the variables that we're going to call a little bit later. So we have a create group constant that we're creating. It's assigned to this function over here. And basically this is taking a group name, and then we are creating a local or block scoped variable here using the let keyword. It's called params, and then we're giving it the group name, and then we're giving it the path. So that's that. We're going to call that, and what's it going to do? It's going to call the SDK IAM.createGroup. This is a function on this object. This is a function on this object. We're passing it the parameters that it's going to need, and then when it's finished, it's going to return us a promise. Similar thing here on line number 30. We are creating a constant variable here. We're assigning it this function, right? We're not executing anything yet. This is not executing. This is declaration, right? We're declaring a variable here, and we're declaring that this is the function that's going to be assigned to it. And we're doing the same thing. We'll call it the IAM object, call the create user object, give it the parameters, and then it returns a promise. And the same thing down here when we get ready to add a user to the group. So we're creating a group, creating a user, then down here we can use this function to add the user to the group. So here is our scenario. Let's say we might have a listener on an FTP site, right? That FTP site may get a file, and then we call this to read said file. So right now we are reading this file, which is on our file system. So this is the Node.js file system object that we required in up here. So it's file system. We're going to read this file synchronously, and it is called employees.json. Employees.json, and this is employees.json file here. So this is just a basic JSON file. I got a username, Barack Obama, got an org unit. This is going to be his group president. Then I have another user, Joe Biden, his organizational unit. You know, if you're thinking Active Directory, it's going to be cabinet, but let's just spell that right? But let's keep going. So it's going to read that file, and now in JavaScript, since we have that file, we know that this guy has an array on it. Now we're going to use the map function to map over the items in employees. So what's going to happen here with map, for each item in this array, it's going to send that data to this function, whatever that function is. So now each item, what is going to be in this data object, and we're sending a data object to this array. So now we're calling our create group, and that's this function. So we have to give it a group name. So the group name is data.org unit, as we saw here in employees. Here's employees, org unit. That's the group we're going to create. And for Joe Biden, we're going to create this cabinet. All right. So we're going to run that. Create group. It's going to return a promise after that group is created. Then we're going to call create user with data.username. So that's how promises work. So if this promise fails, then we're going to run this function. We're going to say oops, and oops is going to contain whatever the message is from the failed promise. So we're going to say that something bad happened, and we're going to attach that to oops, whatever the message is from the API to this. So that just makes sense. Let's run this and see how it goes. I'm going to exit out of here. I'm already in the folder where my index.js file is. So we're just going to run node. Let's do one thing. Let's go over here to the console, and then we will refresh just to make sure we only have 2 users in here. I'm going to run node index.js. This is going to run our JavaScript file that we just looked at. And it looks like we're good. I think if we come down here, let's look at, so if we come back over here and reload, we should have a few more users. And wow, there you go. We have Barack Obama from our employees.json file, and we have Joe Biden from our employees.json file. Now we should also have some groups, right? Because in the index.js, we said create group, then after the group is created, create the user. So the user would actually happen after the group is created. But let's look at the groups, make sure we have a president in that cabinet. So there are groups. So now we have just automated adding groups and adding users. So in time, I'm going to go ahead and finish this whole document, this whole index.js file to create the groups, to create the users, to assign the user to the group, to assign different policies to the group. We're going to build this all the way out. But this is how it works. This is how you use the AWS SDK using Node.js. Automate everything. You don't want to create or update thousands or hundreds of employees by hand. So you would create you a JavaScript file, a JavaScript application. Read that file from the authoritative source, map over those items, and then do whatever you want to do accordingly. All right. Hope you had fun. Hope you enjoyed it. I did. Take care. Bye-bye.